I joined the first working group in Euroseeds when I was still in Germany working in 2008. So we started the discussion in 2008, and that is when the Commission first established a Member States expert working group. So now, 15 years later, we are in the, let's say, hopeful position that with the proposal we will kind of start finalizing the discussion, and it will hopefully go in the right direction. Let me first start introducing Euroseeds for those of you who don't know us. So we are a regional seed association. The Romanian Seed Association is a member of Euroseeds, of course. So we have national association members, more than 30, and we have direct company members as well. And it's not limited to the European Union. Also our UK colleagues are members of Euroseeds, but also we have an association, for example, in Ukraine, in Turkey. And our task is, of course, to represent the interests of the seed sectors in view of policy development, international markets, and intellectual property protection. These are some facts and figures about the seed industry. Each year, the companies bring more than 4,000 varieties to the common catalogue of varieties in the EU. And in total, at the moment, we have more than 51,000 plant varieties that are available for farmers in the European Union. So this is a huge diversity and choice for farmers. And this is only possible because our companies invest more than 20% of their turnover, or up to 20% of their turnover, in research and development. And that's also why developing new technologies, being innovative, bringing new plant varieties on the market is at the heart of the industry, and this is why NGTs are one of our priority topics. So in 2018, you are all aware, we had this European Court of Justice ruling which confirmed that plants resulting from targeted mutagenesis are considered to be GMOs. And that was really, let's say, a pushback and for these technologies and their application in plant breeding, because as you know, the GMO legislation in Europe is pretty burdensome. We have only one GMO which is used for cultivation. This is an insect-resistant maize, and this is only planted in Spain and Portugal. Since 1998, we had no new approval that is into cultivation. So we have, of course, a lot of imports from many countries around the world, but we don't have any new cultivations. And that's why this Court of Justice ruling, of course, created many discussions, not only within the seed industry, but also in the science area and within pharma organizations, because farmers are in the end the customers of the seed sector, and they would profit from having those new varieties available. So what kind of product categories do we know? So I try to elaborate a bit on what we have at the moment. So we have conventional plant varieties, and conventional plant varieties are those which have been bred by conventional breeding, crossing and selection, marker-assisted selection, etc. But conventional also includes GMO techniques, and these are those GMO techniques which are exempted from the GMO regulation according to Annex 1B of the GMO Directive. And this is random mutagenesis, for example, with radiation or with chemicals, and this is also protoplast fusion. And all those plants are considered to be conventional. There is no risk assessment, no labeling requirements, no detection method requirements, and they are allowed for organic farming. And on the other side, we have GMOs, regulated GMOs, transgenic plants. There's a full GMO risk assessment, there's traceability and labeling requirements, they need to be listed in a public register, and you have this opt-out regulation for member states. So if member states don't want to allow GMO cultivation, they opt out, and currently it's 19 of 27 member states that opted out from GMO cultivation, which means the market for companies who would bring products to the market for cultivation is rather limited, and not worth the effort going through this regulatory system. And that's also why we don't have GMO cultivation in Europe. So since 2018, we had a lot of discussions. As I said, EU Council and Commission study, NGT study was published in 2021, and we had this impact assessment by the Commission with stakeholder consultations, etc., EFSA reports. So really a very comprehensive analysis of the situation. And the outcome of this is the policy proposal that has been presented by the European Commission beginning of July. And the scope of this policy initiative is targeted mutagenesis and cisgenesis. So it does not include all kinds of technologies, it's really focused on those. And it's only focused on plants. So we don't have any legal proposal for animals or for microorganisms yet. So what does it mean for our product categories? So the Commission proposal foresees a so-called verification procedure, which means if a developer would like to bring a product, an NGT product, a plant, into the field or on the commercial market, you need to go through this verification process. And this verification process foresees a check of the plant against certain so-called equivalence criteria, and I will come to that on the next slide. And if those plants match the criteria, they are considered NGT category 1 plants. And this is the so-called conventional-like category. So the Commission says if the criteria are met, those plants could be considered conventional-like. So they are equivalent to conventional breeding. There's no risk assessment, but the seeds need to be labeled as NGT category 1, and there needs to be an information in a public register, which is, for example, the Common Catalogue of Varieties and the national catalogs. So that a farmer can make an informed choice saying, I want to use an NGT variety or I don't use an NGT variety, according to the labeling or the information in the catalog. There is no detection method requirement, because those plants are conventional-like, which is indistinguishable from conventional breeding. And that's one of the main points here, they are not allowed for organic farming. And this is, of course, kind of a contradiction, because they are supposed to be conventional-like, but yet they are not allowed for organic farming. And that's because the organic farming lobby was hardly asking for, or was asking for not being able to use those technologies. If they don't meet the criteria, they are so-called NGT category 2, which means there's an adapted risk assessment with some measures for example, SMEs, reduced fees, accelerated risk assessment procedure. There's GMO labeling, and they need to be put in the public GMO register. Regarding detection method requirements, it can be adapted. So if you cannot develop, if you can show you cannot develop a detection method, you don't need to, or it needs only be, let's say, an adapted detection method. There's no opt-out by member states. So if an NGT2 plant is approved, all member states need to accept cultivation, and they are not allowed for organic farming as well. So just a final comment, so the picture gets a bit more complicated. So we had these two categories beforehand, now we have one additional one and one which is the subcategory of GMO. So these are the equivalence criteria that needs to be met in order to be category 1, conventional-like. And I highlighted a few points here. I don't want to go into detail today because this is also very technical. But the Commission limits the genetic changes introduced by NGTs to a number of 20. This is a political decision. As the Commission told the European Parliament upon request, they said, well, this is a rather conservative approach. We wanted to make sure that indeed we were within the limit of what can be achieved by conventional breeding. But there's no science behind this. It's a political decision to limit it to the number of 20. We have some concerns regarding this because it should at least take into account the copy number of genes. So you have genomes which are very complex, like wheat, where you have 6 copies of each gene. And if you take this into account, you can change maximum 3 genes and would still fulfill the requirement of 20, while in a crop which is more simple and has only 2 copies, you can do 10 genetic changes. Another point which is maybe interesting, the Commission also takes into account off-target effects. So if there are changes beyond the ones that you wanted to target, this will also be counted under the number of 20. Although EFSA said this is not relevant. So also here the Commission took a political approach which doesn't have any scientific justification. If the plants don't meet those criteria, they are category 2 as I said. Then you have this verification procedure. It's done by member states' competent authorities. So the competent authorities which are responsible for GMOs in member states, they do the verification procedure. They need to inform all the other member state competent authorities and the Commission. And in case there are comments from other member states, it moves up to the European level, meaning the Commission will be responsible. And that's also, again, a political consideration. You have these criteria, they are science-based, and if a member state can make a comment, we don't know what is the comment. So is it just saying, I don't like it, or is there a scientific justification needed? So this process is kind of going into, again, political considerations, while it should be a rather scientific process. So that's also something we criticize. But we welcome, of course, that there is no risk assessment for those plants because they are conventional-like, so why should they be risk assessed? The same processes, not the same, but also authorization processes here for category 2 plants, they are pretty similar to GMO authorization processes, although a bit lighter and a bit more focused on the concrete risk that might be imposed by a certain product. I don't go into details here, but let's say our assessment and also the feedback we get from our companies is that the GMO light system does not, let's say, is not interesting for companies, specifically for smaller companies, because in the end, you need to label the product, you need to have coexistence measures in place, you have zero tolerance for mixing with other seeds, so this is something which cannot be handled by smaller companies. The Commission also foresees certain benefits, so if you work on traits, which are listed here on the left-hand side, and you have a category 2 plant, you can benefit from certain reduction of fees, from certain accelerated risk assessment processes. In principle, we welcome this list because it just shows that plant breeding can contribute to sustainability in many different ways. The only characteristic which is supposed to be not contributing to sustainability here is the tolerance to herbicides, and we know this has been a big political discussion as well, and specifically France was asking for that one here because the French are very much concerned about the use of herbicides and herbicide-tolerant crops. So just to summarize, so Euroseeds welcomes the proposal and we really welcome the differentiation the Commission takes. It's really a good starting point for further discussions. We regret a bit that still, although category 1 plants are supposed to be conventional, like you have specific requirements like seedbed labeling and the ban for organic farming, this could also be solved by putting a certain specification in the organic regulation saying organic farmers don't want to use NGT plants. So why does it need to be implemented in this regulation? The verification procedure is a bit open for political considerations, which we are a bit critical on. And the Commission took a rather conservative approach by limiting the number of genetic changes to 20, which is also, at least it should be open also for adaptation after, like, I don't know, a certain time. Member states and the Commission should discuss if they can open it more to more extended genetic changes. For category 2, as I said, GMO-like approach is not really interesting for most members of the seed industry. And what we really are concerned about is if a category 2 plant, which is supposed to be a GMO, cannot be identified because we cannot develop a detection method, why is it category 2? It should be category 1 because it cannot be distinguished from conventional plants. So you cannot enforce the detection requirements and traceability and labeling if you cannot develop a detection method. It's positive with a broad range of characteristics, and regarding the discussion on IP, on patents on those plants, the Commission announced that they will go into an assessment of that, a study, assess the impact of potential patents on the market and on the access to the technology. And Euroseeds will be happy to contribute to such an assessment to get clarity on the impact of those IP protection rights in order to also base this discussion on a real study and not on hypothesis. How do we continue? What are the next steps? So we have the policy proposal, and as announced, the Council is already discussing. Also the Parliament will be discussing the proposal. They will both come up with their own stand on the proposal. But we have the EU elections next year, and specifically for Parliament, this is of course a challenge because the last plenary session in Parliament will be in April, which means they would need to finalize their discussion until then to be able to take a vote, which can happen, but it's a challenge, so it's tight. So if they don't meet this date, the new Parliament would need to restart the discussion, which could delay the whole process for at least a year. So depending on how that goes on, we might have an adoption of the regulation in 25 or 26, and then the regulation also foresees implementing acts, so more concrete legal text that allows member states also to implement the process. And that also takes another 2 years. So we will not be having a fully implemented regulation and implemented acts until 2027, 2028. And we hear later about the UK situation, so they might be much earlier, so maybe next year. And not only the UK, if you look at that one, this is the global map. And we see the dark green countries. These are all countries which already have a new regulation implemented, and they also make this differentiation between conventional-like NGT plants and GMOs, meaning they don't regulate those plants as GMOs, they regulate them as conventional without any labeling and traceability requirements. And all these countries, specifically South America, are those countries which export heavily to the European Union. And then we have countries like the EU now, we have also the differentiation in the draft, but also we have a GMO-light approach. And some other countries also take a GMO-light approach like China, as you can see here. And it's only New Zealand and South Africa which still fully regulate as GMO, because they also have a High Court decision in New Zealand, and in South Africa the government decided to take that approach. But the number of countries, dark green countries, let's say, is growing. And so we really also need to make sure that the trade situation is, that trade is enabled, and that we don't create any hurdles by implementing any traceability and labeling requirements which are not applicable in other countries where we import from. And with this, I'd like to end my presentation, and thanks for your attention.